Hi, my name's Angie, and like Cheryl said, I am a wave maker, one of the founding members. I'm a preacher's kid turned Army wife, but today I'm going to talk all about my mindset journey. So I'm going to get right into what I have to say. I am pre-recording this because my parents are in town. I don't know how much time I'll be able to devote to just being on here with you guys, but I promise I will come back and answer any questions and comment to anything that you have to say in response. So I'm going to get right into what I have to say about mindset and creating that positive mindset shift that allows you to make the most of your moments. Making the most of each moment begins with your mindset. Like we talked about earlier in the month, the battle of every battle begins in your mind. So mindset's a journey. It's not, wow, one big amazing epiphany and I have it all figured out. You might have a few of those, but it doesn't happen all at once. It happens over time with consistent, intentional thought and action. For me, my mindset shift began about 14 years ago. Before that, I didn't give much thought to my emotional reactions in any given situation. The result was that I lived in a state of aggravation, disappointment, and apathy. And so some of you who know me are thinking, how is that possible? That's not at all how you are now. Well, stay tuned. I tell the story here. I'm a preacher's kid. I was raised with a strict sense of right and wrong. And while I still believe in that foundation, I've learned to exchange my judgmental reactions for an empathetic response. And note the difference between those words, reaction and response. It takes consistent, intentional thought and practice to develop this habit. I worked as a social worker before I became a wife and a mom. And I was working at a children's home for part of this time. And this children's home was different than some of them. This was a private placement children's home, so parents could place their kids there. The idea behind this was if there was a parent who was having a tough time getting on their feet for whatever reason, maybe they'd left an abusive relationship and they needed a safe place for the kids while they looked for an apartment, looked for a job, and all these kinds of things, while they set up their life and got on their feet. The intent was that they could do that, then come pick up their kids and live happily ever after. What we most often saw was parents who CPS couldn't take their kids away, but they could strongly recommend they find another place for them to live, or the parents would place their kids with us to avoid them being taken by CPS. That was a bad thing in so many ways. I spent many days in tears after we returned some of these children to their parents because I knew what they were going back to. I knew that mom either could not or would not take care of and protect them. I knew she was still with their abuser. And all we could do was call CPS and let them know. We had no power or control over it because they maintained their parental rights. And it was a tough place. And for all kinds of reasons, I left that private sector job and went to a corporate social work job as a case manager in behavioral health coverage. And so if you've ever had to call your insurance to get approval for appointments, I did that on the mental health side. And I got to hear from all kinds of people. I had to hear all their stories as they were seeking help. Some wanted medication management, some wanted therapy, some were looking for a place where they could either themselves or someone, a loved one, go and get rehabilitation help or more intensive inpatient treatment. I evaluated many providers' notes that showed little to no progress on a limited insurance plan. I helplessly followed the criteria, medical necessity, and the number of visits that were allowed by their insurance. Often my hands were tied. Other times it was clear this person needed something that the provider couldn't give them. When I put my notice in for that job, it was about a month before I got married, and my vacation that year, as it had been for the previous two, was doing mission work at the City of Children in Ensenada, Mexico. This week was filled with hard work. So I've laid concrete, I've made concrete to lay the concrete, I've demolished a house, I've built an outhouse, And I've painted houses. We did a VBS with the kids. We ate our big meals with the kids, and we cooked for them and did everything. And then playtime with the kids. And at the end of the week, we all go through all the cottages and say goodnight to all the kids. And they are so loving and generous. They want to give us something when they have nothing. And that is incredible to see. And so then I married my soldier. Those first few weeks tried my patience to a point of exasperated hilarity. If you are a military spouse, you might know what that feeling is like. I don't know that other spouses feel it. I'm sure they do. But there's just a specific nature to the military spouse exasperated hilarity. On our wedding day, my husband, who was in uniform, was bumped from his flight. So technically he couldn't have been late to his own wedding, but he was late to his own wedding. And then our movers badly packed and overcharged us, then broke down, and they called us, this is the quote, from the Texas-Colorado border near Amarillo. Well, at that point, all I could do was laugh in shock. If you don't know or aren't familiar with geography, there is no Texas-Colorado border, and it would not be Amarillo, just for clarification. And then we get to our new home and discover that there was no order to how they'd put things. Nothing was assembled, which we paid for, and several boxes were left outside, including one that had a quilt that my husband's deceased grandmother had made, and it had been handed down to him, and it was very ruined, and we're still working on getting that restored. 14 years later. And so at that point, I couldn't laugh anymore. And so I began putting my emotional responses to work in physical activity. Now, at this point in my life, I can unpack my entire house in a week. At that point, unpack and organize my entire house in a week. At that point, I didn't have that experience yet, but it still took me less than a month. And we were well settled and enjoying our lives together in that first month. In that second month, we received deployment orders and a positive pregnancy test in the same week. I remember this so clearly. I can literally see my husband walking back and forth, talking on the phone to his dad with the good news and the bad news. Now, the bad news of deployment was actually expected news, whereas pregnancy was unexpected news. But, it was a really weird time, really difficult time. And then a few months after that, he left. He came home for the birth and left when my son was 11 days old. Came home again when he was 8 months old. And so our lives were, for the first 6 years, he was gone half the time. So this history lesson serves as my introduction to where my mindset journey had to start. And an Army wife life comes with long separations. I functioned as married but single in my parenting. I spent many days of those early months with Dietrich, with a baby who constantly threw up. He threw up everything he ate, and I couldn't figure it out. I didn't know the pattern. I didn't know what was wrong. There's a whole lot of times that I think he only survived because of Pediasure. And those days were exhausting. The frustration of cleaning up the floors and the furniture, extra laundry and baths, and finding some way to get nutrition into him paled in comparison to the guilt and discouragement I felt over not being able to fix the problem. But after we figured out the cause of those issues, the days did start going better. And I filled our days with play and outings with friends. We explored together and learned together. We lived in Colorado Springs, so we had a lot of things we could do and explore together. We went to the zoo a lot. We went to the Garden of the Gods a lot. And, just anywhere we could go, anything we could do, we played together and just experienced that joy of watching him learn and grow up. And as he learned to talk and express his independence, the days once again became exasperating. And that's when I started changing my mind. When I crawled into bed, exhausted and defeated, I started challenging my negative thinking. I chose to focus on one good thing from that day, and I threw out all the bad things. And that was the beginning. And that's where I tell people to start when they ask, how do you get through things? I say you find one good thing, and that's where you start. And so since the beginning of that intentional focus, I moved across the world to Germany and back. And that move was even more disastrous. I've had a miscarriage, and I've welcomed my rainbow baby. I became a homeschooler, started a business, and I have supported my husband through multiple transitions into civilian life. Part of this includes working through his struggle with PTSD, which sometimes leads to times of unemployment. Now, after we moved here 6 years ago, I participated in one of Miriam's groups. And you may have met Miriam back a few summits ago. And she does these, they're not specifically weight loss groups, but they're about glorifying God's temple, which is your body, by doing what he set out for you to do and taking care of his temple. So my daily Bible reading at this time during this week, there was a Bible verse, and this was called the Radiance Project. I should start with that. This particular group was called the Radiance Project, talking about radiating beauty from the inside out with the choices we make for our health. And in my Bible reading that week, there was Psalm 34. And verses, let's see, it's 3 and 4 or 4 and 5, say, they cry out to me, when they lift their voices up to me, they will feel no shame. I will make them radiant with joy. And I was like, that's amazing. And, things like this where God's timing is perfect. And radiant with joy became like my mission. It became a goal for what I wanted in my life. And so that is where I didn't just end the day with, okay, what's one good thing? What's one good thing? I started the day with, how can I radiate joy? And that's been where I've tried to live ever since that point. And so we've lived here almost 6 years. It'll be 6 years next month. And so this has been really intense mindset training for 6 years. And then if you want to really get down to it, it's been in the past 2 that I got even more serious. And, your stories may be nothing like mine. You may have completely different struggles. You may listen to some of the examples I give and say, well, that's great, but that's nothing like what I'm going through. But each battle still begins and ends with your thinking, with your mind, and where you choose to put it. So if you're focused on the stinkin thinking and the negative thoughts, what can you do about it? Well, if you were with us earlier in the month, I talked about thought stopping, and that is my absolute favorite tool to share with people because it's a simple one, and it's not necessarily easy to do, but it's a simple tool. So when you think those bad negative things, when those stinkin thinking thoughts come in, you just say, nope, stop. And you stop the thought, and then you immediately find something to reframe it with. So if we are having a difficult day here, and let's see, maybe no one is listening and everything's a mess. And I say, you'll never listen. Nothing is going right. Why can't you do, X, Y, Z? Okay, let's stop that thought. And I don't just stop it. I also apologize. I say, I apologize for losing my temper. Let's work together on cleaning this up and making it what it needs to be for whatever thing we're getting ready for. And then we do that. Maybe I will put on some praise music while I do it. Maybe we'll listen to the Bible while we do it. But we will replace those negative things with something positive and uplifting that gets, lifts our spirits and allows us to work together and get along. Another part of that is that you have to consistently do it. And you have to not go back to it. So using those words like always, never, those all-inclusive, exclusive statements. Instead of saying, you never do what I ask, or why can't you just do this? You have to change the way that you use your words. And I do this all day long, and I teach my children this. So we don't use words like I can't. We say, well, I don't know how, or I don't want to. And if it's the I don't want to, then we have another lesson we learn. And each of these pieces goes towards building their mindsets as well. It goes towards building better moments for them. And there's a whole lot of things that I could say no to all day long. But there's a lot of times there's just not a reason to say no to them. I think if we can do things within reasonable limits, then it's okay. So one of our big struggles, I'm sure you can relate if you have tween or teen children, is video games. Or if you have husbands. Sometimes husbands have this problem too. But so we have time limits. And sometimes my kids will come up with like an atrocious number of time limit. And I'm like, no, you cannot have an hour. No, you cannot have 45 minutes. Most often we say anywhere from 10 to 30. And I base that on what they've already done that day. Have you done your schoolwork? Did you read? Did you play outside? Which they can't really do. Well, they haven't been able to do this week because it's rained and it's amazing. But I'll say, have you done some kind of physical activity? We have an indoor rebounder for that purpose. Have you read? Have you read your Bible? What have you learned today? And we go through all these different kinds of things. And then, okay, yes, you can play for this amount of time. And, whatever we're doing, I'm always bringing it back to learning something. What did you learn from? What are you reading about in this book? How can you apply that to, what it relates to in history or in, science or whatever different thing. And it's amazing to watch them make those connections just because we're spending that time intentionally and making the most of those little bitty moments. Because at the end of the day, it's not one big amazing memory that they take with them or that you will take with you. It's all those little moments that were just so extraordinary in their everyday mundaneness. And this is a lesson that we learned very deeply on August 7th, 2019, and the days and weeks that followed. When people would ask us about specific things regarding Ellen Aranza, we would say, it's just those little everyday things. It's not some big thing that I look at and say, oh, this makes me think of, Aranza. A lot of the times it is something really small. And today we saw a bird. Then my son says, that's a really weird looking bird. And then a mile down the road, he's like, maybe it was a crane. And I kind of chuckled. I said, that makes sense. It's the right time of year. Ella loved cranes. And it was just one of those things that brought like a smile to my face because she loved watching the cranes. And so having those little memories that make those moments amazing. Every day can be your best day ever. Not long after we moved here, I guess we've been here a year, Dietrich's first birthday party that he had with his church friends, he said, this was my best birthday ever. And I was like, this is better than Thomas Land? And I spent like a year planning going to Thomas Land on your birthday. He's like, yeah, because all my friends were there. That was a real mindset shift for me. And it's not that he didn't enjoy Thomas Land and that wasn't an important memory. It's that he values people over those things and those experiences because those people matter to him. And making those memories with those people matters to him. And so that's what I want to encourage all of you to do. When you're making the most of your moments, it's not necessarily the big things you do. It's taking that joy and that one thing, that one time, and being solely focused on how am I going to get the most out of this day? What is going to bring the most joy to my husband, my children, my friend, whatever, whoever in your life you're spending those moments with. And at the end of the day, if you can say, this was a really good day, I can't think of any bad parts, I'm going to keep all these good things stored in my heart. They're going to build my treasures in heaven. And I'm just going to just relax in that peace and give all the glory to the Father who gave me those moments. And then you'll have an extraordinary set of memories that you either leave behind in your legacy or that you have to remember somebody who goes before you. And those are kind of, morbid thoughts in some ways, but I think they're important thoughts for the world today and all of its uncertainty. And it's always been an uncertain world. It's just this past year and a half has really driven home how uncertain it is. And so if you need additional encouragement in that, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We would love to, walk with you through that and encourage you in any way we can. And I will get something put together with those tips like thought stopping and the other ones. They might still be in here in the worksheets from the last time. And if they are, you can just use those. If not, I'll make some other ones because I really say the same sorts of things every time I talk about mindset and making the most of the time you have, because it's a lesson that I truly believe in. It's a lesson that I've seen evolve in my own life. Like I said, specifically over the last 6 to 14 years, but it's been there all along. And your journey is no different. It's always been there. You just have to decide at which point you're going to turn and make a better destination. And I will talk to you all another time. I'm so glad you're joining us tonight. Thanks. Bye.